It's a bird. No, it's a plane. What if we told you that it's actually a flying submarine? Hard to believe, right? The flying submarine was a military dream that caught some attention, but unfortunately never became a reality. Today we take you on a deep dive, or should we say, we are going to fly through how us humans almost built this seemingly impossible machine. If we take a little turn back in time, submarines have actually been around for over 300 years. But for most of that lifespan, they were unreliable and almost unrecognizable from the submarines we know today. The Hunley, built by the Confederate Army during the American Civil War, was the first submarine to attack and sink an enemy ship successfully. But it wasn't until the German U-boats of the First World War that submarines cemented themselves as a fundamental part of naval warfare. But before nuclear power became the standard in these underwater beasts, submarines had terrible range and speed. To add to their incompetence, they had tactical limitations too. Submarines relied heavily on help from other military assets and rudimentary radar technology to find targets and evade enemies. These limitations inspired a Russian engineer, Boris Ushakov, to draw up plans for a submersible aircraft during World War II. His plane-sub-hybrid design would allow the pilot to spot enemy ships from the air, then dive underwater to approach them cautiously before attacking with torpedoes. Ushakov's ambitious plans involved using floodable compartments, including the cockpit. That meant that the crew would have to go into a separate area when the vehicle was underwater. His design allowed the plane to fly at 100 knots in the air but just 3 knots underwater. The Russian Navy showed interest in Ushakov's design, and early development began. Despite the intrigue, it was quickly discarded because it was too complex, impractical, and limited in potential uses. It made much more sense to continue using submarines and aircraft in tandem instead of combining them. Now let's look at why this creative design was knocked down. Even though the Russians decided the flying submarine wasn't worth the trouble, not everyone agreed, including American Donald Reid. Reid was an engineer at the aircraft manufacturer North American Aviation and an avid tinkerer. While building a radio-controlled model submarine in his basement in 1956, a pair of model airplane wings fell off a shelf and landed on the sub. Is that a coincidence? We think not. Reid saw a fun challenge and lots of dollar signs. He knew the US Navy would pay big bucks for a flying submarine, and he was convinced he could make it happen. Reid spent hours working on his submarine during his free time and began constructing the vehicle from leftover airplane parts and scrap metal, including a steel bed frame and 2 metal garbage can lids. He enlisted the help of his son and daughter, and before long, kids from all over his quiet New Jersey neighborhood were peering through the fence at the Reid's Frankenplane. The result was a float plane that could flood its fuselage to sink below the surface. By 1962, the Reids were ready to test this brilliant plane and submarine combination. Bruce flew the plane for over 75 feet on the Shrewsbury River and submerged it a few meters. Success! To his good fortune, Reid received a patent for his flying sub the following year. Reid named his vehicle the Reid Flying Submarine, or RFS-1. But to be honest, this flying submarine was far from perfect. The pilot had to remove the plane's propeller and cover the engine with a rubber gas tank before submerging it. And the open cockpit meant the pilot had to wear scuba gear to breathe. That sounds like a lot of work with a lot of risks involved. Wouldn't be too practical for an operation, would it? The RFS-1 could only dive to 12 feet and traveled even slower than Ushakov's design. It was not the most sophisticated, but hey, it worked. It could dive, turn, and surface. But when it was time to turn into an airplane again, its 65 horsepower, 4-cylinder engine lacked enough power to do much more than take short hops above the water. Reid continued to tinker with the RFS-1, but it never improved much. And the Military Invention Board dismissed his idea as impractical. So Reid never saw any of that sweet, sweet Navy money of his dreams. After he died in 1991, his family donated the RFS-1 to the Mid-Atlantic Air Museum in Pennsylvania. The Reid flying submarine was an incredible family project, but not a real military machine. May he rest in peace, because he was courageous enough to make his dream a reality. The same year Reid tested his RFS-1 on the Shrewsbury River, Convair engineer Eugene Handler published a study in Proceedings of the U.S. Naval Institute that explored the possibility of a flying submarine. Handler said he believed it was possible to design a craft that could submerge up to 75 feet, with speeds up to 10 knots in water and air speeds of up to 225 knots. He suggested the flying sub could stay underwater for up to 10 hours or fly for 3 hours. He also thought it could carry a payload between 500 and 1,500 pounds. That's a lot of features to promise before you even have a prototype. Handler admitted it would be challenging, writing that the development of a flying submarine would be complex and laborious. Yet he still believed the returns would be worth the efforts. Unfortunately, Handler never got the chance to find out because his concept was scrapped. Handler's study was helpful to Irwin Allen when he was planning his TV show, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. Allen hired a researcher to collect an archive of existing underwater technology so he could use it as the basis for the show's vehicles and props. The researcher brought Allen a stack of papers, including Handler's flying submarine study. It's believed that Handler's sketches and descriptions inspired the stingray-shaped submersible featured on the show. With all the failed attempts, the idea of a flying submarine was still too alluring to let go. In 2003, DARPA launched a study on reusable submersible aircraft. And in 2006, Lockheed Martin used the research and its multi-purpose unmanned aerial vehicle concept to begin the Cormorant project. The Cormorant was imagined to be a 19-foot-long drone that would fit inside a missile sub's existing launch tube. The sub would release the drone to minimize detection and then move away. Compressed gas would then drive the drone to the surface, where its rocket motors would fire and lift it into the sky. Once in the air, its wings would unfold and a jet engine would kick on, allowing the Cormorant to fly as far as 500 miles at altitudes of up to 35,000 feet. When its mission was done, the Cormorant would come back near the sub, deploy a parachute, and land in the water. The sub's crew could use a swimming robot to tow the drone back to the submarine. The Cormorant was the most useful and realistic version of the flying sub to date, but it seems to have lost steam with budget cuts in 2008. Despite all these failed attempts, there is some good news. After the Cormorant project ended, Naval Surface Warfare Center engineers designed their own submersible aircraft for special operations. Their design was similar to Ushakov's hybrid model, with hollow spaces and a pressure compartment. The vehicle was about 35 feet long with a wingspan of about 100 feet. It was imagined to carry 6 Special Operations Forces personnel and 2 pilots about 800 miles in the air and up to 12 miles underwater. We're not sure exactly how great the efforts were to bring this design to life, but the study's conclusions state that a working design is feasible within the current state of the art. The Naval Research Laboratory also tested a small air-launched vehicle that could dive into bodies of water to travel short distances in the early 2010s. They could not get the models to perform both functions in a single test. The Office of Naval Research also developed the Flying Sea Glider around this time, which was designed to be dropped from an altitude of up to 30,000 feet before gliding above the water and diving below the surface. Other projects exploring the possibility of a submersible aircraft continued until 2018, but the flying submarine has yet to become a reality. It's within the realm of possibility that there may someday be an airplane that can dive below the water to carry out stealth missions before soaring back to its base. And when that happens, we will be sure to make a detailed video about it on this channel. So subscribe if you don't want to miss it.